So this is a really basic introduction to how to sharpen a chainsaw chain. I'm not going to go really in depth into all of the different types of ways that you can sharpen and the real specifics of how to make a chain as sharp as possible. But this is just the basic, how do you get your chain sharper so that it will cut better without having to send it off to someone else professional or pay someone else to sharpen your chain for you. So first of all, this is like what you ideally need as a sharpening setup. So very simple really. I've got my vise here. It's not particularly well held down, but it's, it does the job, and I can actually unscrew it and move it as well, which is really good. What you've then got is all your different files here. So there are smaller files for the smaller chain that I have and bigger files for the bigger chain. Every chain will have a file that will fit it specifically. So if you're not sure, take your chain into a chainsaw shop and ask them for a file that fits. You've got flat files for doing the rakers, which I'll show you about later, and then the round files which will sharpen the cutting edges. And the other tools there I will explain as we get to them later. So the first thing that you absolutely want to do is to be able to put the chainsaw somewhere where it's not going to move very much. Pretty much everyone does this by putting the chainsaw bar into a vise. Just to give you a quick idea, the bar is the bit here you can see here which says Echo on it, and the chain is the bit which goes around it. No one ever uses the term blade, so just bar and chain is what we will use to describe this. It's really important to get the chain in a position so that it's going to move as little as possible, so the files can have the most effect when you're running them across the teeth. Now, if you're out in the woods or something, you might want to get one of these. This is what is called a stump vise. It is basically a small mini vise which you can hammer the spiky bits into a piece of wood like a stump, and so that when you're out in the field and you haven't got a workshop with you, you can hammer that in and then use it to sharpen your chain in the field, which is really useful. Next thing that's really important to have is a Sharpie, a little felt tip pen like this, because you can use that to mark the chain so you know where you've started and finished. This little gadget is called a file guide. It's really useful if you're not used to sharpening chainsaws, as it fits into a specific size of file for a specific size of chain, and it makes sure that you don't file too deep or too high, so you get just the right height and angles. Really helpful if you've not done much chainsaw sharpening before. Before you do anything, make sure the chainsaw is off and you have engaged the chain brake. So to start off with, what I'm going to do is just use the Sharpie to mark two of the teeth so that I know where I've started and where I'm going to finish. What I'm then going to do is take the handle off of the big file that I use for my other saw and make sure I've selected the right sized file for this chain and put it into the little wooden handle. And you generally just sort of push it in on a bit of wood so that it sticks in with friction nice and easily. And what I'm then going to do is very simply start sharpening. Now, I'm going to show you this from a couple of different angles, but as you can see, I've placed the file into the curved part of the cutting tooth. I'm pushing back slightly so that I file off material from the inside and near the top of the tooth. To start with, it might be a little bit jittery and jumpy, as you can see here, because this is the first time I've sharpened this chain, and it's the first time I've used this file, and the chain is, to be fair, a little bit dirty. As you can see, you basically want to use the file to try and take material off of the cutting tooth so that you are left with a nice, shiny, sharp edge. It's also helpful if you tap your file every couple of strokes just to remove the bits of swarf that might be stuck to the file and the chain. Once you've sharpened one tooth, move the chain around a bit and re-engage the chain brake and sharpen the next one. To start with, don't worry about how hard you're pushing. The main thing that matters is consistency. If you do the same number of strokes with the same number of force on each tooth, you should have a chain that is equally sharp all the way around. A chain which isn't equally sharp all the way around will pull to one side or the other and won't cut as effectively. Consistency is the most important thing to start with. The next thing that you want to consider is the angle at which you are holding the file and pushing it against the tooth. If you did it just at 90 degrees, you would essentially end up with a flat edge that wouldn't cut anything. You want to hold your file between 25 and 35 degrees. A good file guide will have these lines drawn on them and can really help. As you can see here, when you finish, the rear and top part of the cutting tooth should be shiny and sharp to the touch. In time, you should get into a pretty comfortable rhythm of doing the same number of strokes over all of the teeth and moving the chain along nicely to sharpen the next tooth. Start off slowly and build confidence as you go. I'm not the best chainsaw sharpener in the world by any standards, but again, as this is just a basics video, just remember to try and be consistent and effective. You may well have noticed that half of the cutting teeth on the chain are facing in one direction and half of them face in the other direction. Obviously, once you have done one side of the chain, turn the chainsaw around and sharpen from the other side. Do not try and sharpen from the outside in on any of the teeth. Just do one side of the chain and then turn the chainsaw around and start on the other side. Again, do the same number of strokes on both sides of the chain. Once you've done all the cutting teeth, you need to file down the rakers, or depth gauges as they're called. These are the small points in front of the cutting tooth, which essentially tells the tooth how much wood to cut. You use a little tool like this to sit over the top of the cutting tooth, and then however much of the raker protrudes between the gap is how much you need to file down with a flat file. It's sometimes not much, and different people prefer to file their rakers down different amounts depending on what kind of cutting they're doing. But as a general rule of thumb, if you use one of these little tools, it should show you a tiny bit sticking just up above the point of the guide, and that's how much you need to file off. Again, try and keep this consistent all the way around the chain so you get a nice even cut. And once you've followed all of those steps, you should have a relatively nice, sharp chain. Again, you'll need slightly different tools for different chains, but the same process applies no matter what saw you are using. I hope this short, basic guide was helpful to you, and if you'd like to subscribe to my channel, I would really appreciate that. Thanks very much. Be safe. Take care.